The surgeon's truth. The hospital corridor carried a sharp antiseptic scent as Dr. Marcus Hayes scrubbed his hands, preparing for surgery. A nurse, Clara Evans, rushed past, thrusting a mop toward him. "Clean room 5, please," she said brusquely. Marcus glanced at her but said nothing. Minutes later, a code blue blared overhead, urgent and piercing. The janitor they'd mistaken him for would soon become the surgeon they desperately needed. Fluorescent lights flickered faintly in the hospital hallway, casting soft shadows on the pale floor. The antiseptic smell hung heavy, masking traces of sweat, stress, and stale coffee. Dr. Marcus Hayes walked with measured steps, his ID badge clipped to his navy scrubs. Still stiff with starch. His shoulders were squared, his chin slightly raised, projecting quiet confidence. His eyes, sharp and reserved, caught fleeting glances from others, glances not meant to be noticed. 2 nurses passed, their voices low. "He's new, right? Cleaning staff. Why's he near the OR?" Marcus didn't react. He'd heard it before, in med school, during residency, even at grand rounds. Some assumptions were spoken, others lingered in the silence between words, louder than any insult. If you are enjoying the story, tell us where you are listening from. Let's know how far Untold Stories travels. Outside the surgeon's lounge, a young intern, Ethan Carter, leaned against the doorframe. Coffee cup in hand, his stethoscope dangling with unearned swagger. He tilted his head at Marcus and grinned. "Wrong door, buddy." Marcus paused, meeting Ethan's gaze for a brief, still moment. No smile, no anger, just calm. Then he turned the handle and stepped inside, leaving Ethan's smirk to dissolve like a failed joke. Inside, the lounge offered no warmth. A few doctors looked up, their confusion barely concealed. One muttered to another, "What, janitors get fancy uniforms now?" Marcus heard the words but walked past, unfazed. No one greeted him, no one nodded. He opened his locker with smooth precision, retrieving a surgical binder packed with neat notes, pre-op files for a high-risk aortic valve case he'd studied for days. He poured a cup of coffee at the machine, his hand steady. When a doctor tossed a crumpled paper towel that landed at his feet, missing the trash, Marcus stared at it briefly, then stepped around it. He didn't pick it up. He owed them nothing. That eye in the corner, Dr. Rachel Stein, a respected attending in her 50s. Glanced up, recognition flickering in her eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it, saying nothing. Even those who knew Marcus often stayed silent. He didn't need their voices. His presence, calm, steady, unyielding, was louder than their whispers. Every breath he took in that room was defiance. Every moment he didn't explain himself spoke volumes. He checked his watch, 20 minutes until surgery. He adjusted his scrub cap, took a sip of coffee, and turned to leave, his posture composed, not because he didn't feel the sting of their judgments, but because he'd learned dignity was born in restraint. Let them whisper. Let them doubt. The operating room would reveal the truth. The hospital's sterile calm shattered in an instant. "Code blue, or 2. "Repeat, code blue, or 2, crackled the intercom, sharp and urgent. Time seemed to pause, then chaos erupted. Footsteps pounded down the hallway, nurses grabbed gloves, and a surgical cart rattled past in a blur of instruments and adrenaline. In the surgeon's lounge, coffee cups clattered as chairs scraped back, conversations dying mid-sentence. Everyone stood, eyes wide, scanning each other, waiting for someone to act. Who's on call? A doctor asked, voice tight. Dr. Patel, a nurse replied, tapping her phone. But he's off-site, at least 15 minutes away. That patient doesn't have 15 minutes, another voice said, cold and final. Panic crept into the room. We need a lead now, a nurse urged, her tone high-pitched. But no one moved, not the intern with the smug laugh, not the doctors who'd whispered about janitorial uniforms, not those who'd questioned Marcus's presence. They stood frozen, caught between their titles and their fear. Then, from the back of the room, a calm, even voice cut through the tension. I've got it. Heads whipped around. Standing in the doorway, framed by the fluorescent light spilling from the corridor, was Dr. Marcus Hayes. His posture was relaxed. But his eyes, dark, focused, unwavering, carried the weight of someone who'd faced this moment before and never faltered. His scrub top was crisp, his badge gleaming, Dr. Marcus Hayes, Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery. The silence that followed wasn't just shock, it was realization. They hadn't seen him, not truly. A junior nurse stammered, wait, Marcus didn't wait for her to finish. I need vitals, scans, and a team prepped in or two, he said, already moving. Orders were shouted, feet scrambled, and the corridor's tone shifted in seconds. No more assumptions, no more laughter, just clipped confirmations and professionals moving like a machine under Marcus's command. As he strode past, he passed Clara, the nurse who'd handed him the mop earlier. Her face burned red with the memory, but Marcus didn't glance at her. There was no time for that. Inside the air buzzed with tension. A man in his 50s lay unconscious on the table, his heart barely registering a flutter on the monitor. A collapsed valve and internal bleeding meant a race against time. Marcus scrubbed in swiftly, his movements smooth and practiced. Vitals? He asked. BP 60/40, VFib detected, the anesthesiologist replied. Clamp the artery. Retractors here. Suction on the left, Marcus directed, his voice calm but firm. Each instruction was met with instant action. The intern, Ethan, stood in the viewing window, eyes wide behind his glasses, watching Marcus navigate the failing heart with unshakable confidence. An attending who'd mistaken him for a janitor whispered, "My God, he's saving him." The procedure lasted just under 10 minutes, 10 minutes where every second held the weight of life and death. Marcus's hands were steady, his mind sharp, his presence a silent grace that carried the room. When the heart monitor finally beeped in steady rhythm, the team exhaled. He's stable, the anesthesiologist said softly. Marcus nodded, peeling off his gloves. Keep monitoring. He'll need a full post-op protocol. I'll brief the family. He stepped back, letting the adrenaline drain from his shoulders, his scrubs damp with effort. Clara, the nurse who'd handed him the mop, looked at him, her eyes no longer dismissive but awestruck. I'm sorry, she whispered. Marcus met her gaze, not with anger or smugness, but with quiet resolve. It's not your apology I need, he said gently, then walked out, the doors swinging shut behind him. Later, the double doors of the operating room swung open with a soft whoosh as Marcus stepped inside for another case. The air was thick with urgency, the patient's heart faltering beneath the surgical drape. The overhead lights buzzed faintly, casting harsh white halos. A monitor beeped erratically, charting a heart losing its fight. Around the table stood a half-assembled team, a scrub nurse adjusting tools, an anesthesiologist monitoring vitals, and a young surgeon, Dr. Liam Grant, barely 30, standing center stage, mask on, eyes wide. Marcus approached the sink, scrubbing in methodically, the brush moving over his hands in swift, purposeful strokes. Soap swirled down the drain, washing away distractions. There was no room for anger here, not now. Liam turned at the sound of footsteps, his eyes widening. "Wait, he froze, then softened as recognition hit. "You're Dr. Hayes." Marcus met his gaze calmly. "Yes. I'll be leading." Liam blinked, then stepped aside without protest. It wasn't about pride, it was about survival. They all knew who was best equipped for a cardiothoracic crisis. A tense hush fell over the room. Clara, the nurse who'd shoved the mop at Marcus, paused mid-instrument count, her face pale beneath her mask. She recognized him now, not as a janitor, but as the man she'd dismissed without a second glance. Shame washed over her, but Marcus didn't acknowledge it. "Vitals?" he asked. "BP 58/35, irregular rhythm, valve likely ruptured," the anesthesiologist answered quickly. Marcus nodded. "Prep the valve kit. Rib spreader and retractors ready." The team snapped into action, the atmosphere shifting from chaos to precision. Marcus leaned over the patient, the monitor's beep syncing with his steady breath. The first incision was smooth, deliberate. Clara handed him a scalpel, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to hide her regret. Marcus didn't look at her, not out of coldness, but discipline. This was a time for saving, not reckoning. The chest cavity opened, revealing a heart in bad shape, swollen, spasming, drowning in its own weakness. To anyone else, it might have seemed a lost cause, but not to Marcus. "Clamp the artery. Suction here. More exposure on the left," he said, his voice low and steady, like a conductor guiding a symphony. Liam, now watching in awe, barely breathed. Clara followed every instruction, her hands seeking redemption. Even the anesthesiologist leaned forward, as if witnessing something sacred. Minutes passed, then more. Marcus didn't look up, his hands sure, his focus absolute. The monitor's erratic beeps began to steady. "Valves in, sutures holding. Prepare to close," he said. He finished with the same quiet grace he'd entered with, no drama, no pride, just purpose. When the chest was sealed and the heart beat strongly, Marcus peeled off his gloves slowly. "Good work, everyone. Monitor him in post-op. He should stabilize within the hour." The silence that followed was different now, not fear or surprise, but respect, raw and undeniable. As Marcus moved toward the door, Clara stepped forward, hesitating. "Dr. Hayes," she said softly, "I'm so sorry." He paused, looking at her, not with bitterness or triumph, but with quiet honesty. "I know," he said, and walked out, leaving a room forever changed. Back in the corridor. The hospital's midday buzz had returned, but something felt different. The air was lighter, as if the building had exhaled. Nurses moved with new attentiveness, glancing at name badges more carefully. Conversations hushed when Marcus passed, replaced by a respectful silence. In the waiting area outside the OR, word spread like wildfire: the janitor who saved a life wasn't a janitor, he was the chief cardiothoracic surgeon. No one could unsee it now. Hours later, the patient, Mr. Thomas Reed, a 52-year-old school teacher and father of 3, was wheeled into recovery. Monitors hummed with steady rhythms, color returning to his cheeks. His chest rose and fell evenly under the thin hospital blanket. The worst had passed. A head nurse in the post-op unit murmured to her assistant, he wouldn't have made it without that surgeon. "What's his name again?" "Marcus Hayes," came the quiet reply. "Chief of Cardiothoracic." The name spread through the hospital, from nurse to doctor, from staff to visitor. People who'd never acknowledged Marcus now leaned in to remember him. That afternoon, in a quickly gathered meeting near the surgical wing, hospital leadership appeared. Dr. Edward Klein, the medical director, a stoic man with gray hair and a clipboard always tucked under his arm, stood at the head of the group. His tone was formal, but reverence seeped through. "I want to commend Dr. Hayes for his swift, decisive action during today's Code Blue. His leadership in the OR saved a patient's life under extreme pressure." He turned to Marcus, who stood off to the side, arms loosely folded, eyes calm but guarded. "We're proud to have someone of his caliber on our staff, and I expect all departments to show the respect his title and skill demand." A few claps followed, tentative at first, then stronger, some genuine, some merely following the cue. Marcus gave a small nod, acknowledging the recognition. But inside, he wasn't seeking applause. He never had been. He just wanted them to see. As the crowd dispersed and the hallway quieted, Clara appeared again, her posture different now. Gone was the brisk confidence she'd wielded like a shield. Her steps were small, her voice barely a whisper. "Dr. Hayes," she said, hesitating. He looked up from the chart he was reviewing. "I wanted to say I'm sorry for earlier. For assuming." Her hands were clasped tightly, knuckles pale, her eyes holding a mix of guilt and humility. Marcus watched her for a moment, then closed the file. "Next time," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "look at the name badge first." The words landed not as a rebuke, but as truth, clean, undeniable. Clara nodded, her face flushed. "You're right," she said. Marcus offered no smile, no further comfort, because that was the lesson, and it was hers to carry. For the rest of the day, Marcus walked the halls not as the invisible man, but as something else. Eyes met his with respect. Doors were held open. A few interns nodded, their earlier dismissals replaced with embarrassment or pride too stubborn to voice. It didn't matter. Respect wasn't demanded, it was earned, and more importantly, recognized. Marcus had done both. He didn't need validation. He had the life he'd saved, the truth he lived, and the quiet power of doing his job well. Even when no one expected it, that evening, Marcus passed a janitor, an older black man pushing a cart down the hallway. Their eyes met briefly, and the janitor gave a knowing nod. It was the first true acknowledgement Marcus had felt all day. No words were needed, just understanding. The janitor didn't ask what happened. He didn't have to. He knew.